Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. So, a few days ago now, NVIDIA released, I guess you could say, the new 12GB variant of the RTX 3080, which sounds like it's pretty much the same as the original RTX 3080, but with 2GB more VRAM. And while that is the gist of it, there is a little more to it. Along with the extra memory, there's a 3% increase in core count and an 8% increase for the ROPs, and this sees the 12GB model jump up to a 384-bit wide memory bus for a 20% increase in memory bandwidth, despite the fact that it uses the same 19 gigabits per second GDDR6X memory. So, the key advantage here is the 20% increase in memory bandwidth and capacity. All said and done, the 12GB 3080 will land between the original 3080 and 3080 Ti in terms of performance, and I suspect it will often be closer to the 3080 Ti, so a nice little upgrade there. Of course, the problem with the 12GB 3080 is the same problem we face with all graphics cards right now: pricing and availability. Given the performance, it's no surprise to find that the 12GB model is positioned between the original 3080 and 3080 Ti, and depending on where you are, the 12GB 3080 might actually be slightly better value than the 10GB model. So I suppose you could argue that it's a welcomed upgrade. Personally though, I'd rather NVIDIA remained committed to improving availability of the product they released in September of 2020, one which many people are still waiting for, the original 10GB RTX 3080. Anyway, we'll touch on that more towards the end of the video. For now, let's go over the test system specs and then jump into a few benchmark results. For testing, I'm using our Ryzen 9 5950X GPU test system featuring 32GB of dual-rank, dual-channel DDR4 3200CL14 memory. As for the GPUs, all have been tested with the default AMD and NVIDIA clock specifications, so no factory overclocking, and that means the MSI Suprim X model used to test the 12GB 3080 has been downclocked to the official specification. Now, please note that while we have decided to start testing CPUs with resizable bar enabled, we're yet to do the same for GPUs, and the reason is this. For CPUs, it's a platform feature, so when reviewing a CPU, we're accurately portraying the performance of that product when using resizable bar. But for GPUs, it is a little different. Although rebar is technically still a GPU feature, we don't want to assume that everyone has a Ryzen 5000 series processor. Using rebar with older Ryzen processors and of course Intel CPUs will lead to different results, and in many cases, it's not even properly supported, well, supported at all. For example, the Radeon RX 6800 XT receives around a 20% boost in Assassin's Creed Valhalla with resizable bar enabled when using our Ryzen 9 5950X test system. But if we had, for example, a Core i9 9900K, this feature isn't even supported, so no performance gain there via resizable bar. And yes, we do know that some motherboards supporting the 9900K do have that feature, but if you enable it, it doesn't work very well, if at all. Now this is an issue because the RTX 3080 only receives around a 5 to 10% boost with resizable bar enabled in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and that gives AMD a massive advantage on our Ryzen 5000 test system, an advantage you're unlikely to see on almost all other platforms. So until resizable bar is supported and works well on a wide range of modern platforms, we're going to limit its use to CPU/platform testing. Okay, so with that disclaimer out of the way, let's get into the benchmark data. Okay, let's start by going over the Assassin's Creed Valhalla data, starting with the 1080p results. Here the 12GB 3080 along with the original 3080 and 3080 Ti all delivered basically the same result. And here we are architecturally bottlenecked with Ampere, as it's unable to efficiently feed all the cores at this lower resolution, leading to the 6800 XT delivering around 14% more performance. That margin though is halved at 1440p, with the 6800 XT now just 7% faster than the 12GB 3080, and this saw the updated GeForce GPU basically matching the 3080 Ti while offering an extremely mild 6% gain over the original 10GB 3080. Then at 4K, the new 12GB 3080 overtook the 6800 XT, beating it by an 8% margin, while beating the original 3080 by 10%. It was also within a frame of the 3080 Ti, so basically, we are looking at 3080 Ti-like performance in this title. Next up, we have Far Cry 6, and here we're CPU limited at 1080p, and that means basically no difference in performance between the 3080 variants along with the 3080 Ti and 3090. It's actually pretty similar story at 1440p with these high-end GPUs, and although the 6800 XT hits the lead, it's well down when it comes to the 1% low performance. Now, at 4K, those weaker 1% lows of the Radeon GPUs are gone, likely because the frame rates aren't driving quite as high, and we're now seeing the 12GB 3080 matching the 6800 XT with 77 FPS on average, placing it pretty well between the 10GB version and 3080 Ti. Watch Dogs Legion presents us with more of the same. At 1080p, the Radeon GPUs generally perform better, while the 12GB 3080 can be found situated between the 10GB 3080 and 3080 Ti, but generally closer to the Ti model. Moving up to 1440p sees the new 12GB model outpace the 10GB version by a 7% margin, making it just 4% slower than the 3080 Ti and roughly on par with the 6800 XT. Then, as expected, the Ampere GPUs fare best at 4K. Here, the 12GB 3080 was 11% faster than the 6800 XT, which is a commanding lead, and just 3% behind what was achieved by the 3080 Ti. Last up, we're going to take a look at the Cyberpunk 2077 results, but I have tested 8 more games, and we'll make those graphs available to Floatplane and Patreon members. But for the purpose of this video, we're going to skip all of that repetitive data and just jump to the 12-game average, after looking at Cyberpunk, of course. The 1080p data is pretty much as expected. The 12GB 3080 basically matched the 3080 Ti, making it a fraction faster than the original 3080. At 1440p, the margins open up a little bit. The 3080 12GB is now 5% faster than the 10GB version and just 3% slower than the 3080 Ti. Technically, the 3080 is now faster than the 6800 XT, though that margin is ultimately worthless. Then at 4K, the 12GB 3080, I know this video I've said 3080 way too many times, but there are now technically 3 3080 products, and I'm talking about all of them in this video. Anyway, the 3080 nudged ahead of the 6900 XT to beat the 6800 XT by an 8% margin, making it just 4% slower than the 3080 Ti. So that's probably enough looking at the individual game data. Let's just move on to the averages. So, here's the 12-game average data at 1080p, and as you can see, the small upgrade has allowed the 12GB 3080 to match the 6800 XT. So if the original 3080 and 3080 Ti weren't quite close enough for you in terms of performance, the new 12GB model is just 1.5% slower than the Ti model. So that's some seriously heavy product segmentation from Nvidia there, but then we are only looking at the 1080p results. Jumping to 1440p, we see that the original 3080 and 6800 XT are evenly matched, so that means the mere 5% boost offered by the 12GB model is enough to hit the lead, I suppose, technically. But it is a rather pointless margin, and it is now just 3% slower than the 3080 Ti. When compared to the Radeon competition, Ampere is again at its best when compared at 4K, and here the 12GB 3080 was 10% faster than the 6800 XT, which is a reasonable margin. That said, it is just a 6% improvement over the original 3080 and 4% slower than the 3080 Ti. So pretty well smack bang in the middle there, and again, heavy product segmentation from Nvidia on this one. As for the power consumption, I suggest taking the 12GB 3080 numbers as more of a ballpark figure, and that's because for most of these cards I've used the Nvidia Found Edition model, which is better power optimized when compared to MSI's beefy Suprim X. Even though the Suprim X is downclocked, the voltages aren't optimized at the default clock speeds, and this increases power usage. Had we received an FE model, I'd expect power consumption to land somewhere between the original 3080 and 3080 Ti. Before wrapping things up, let's take a quick look at ray tracing. But of course, like the rasterization results, nothing will have changed from the original 3080 and 3080 Ti testing. For example, in Cyberpunk 2077, the 6800 XT is crippled with any form of ray tracing enabled, with the high settings hitting frame rates by 46%. The 12GB 3080 is still hit very hard, dropping 31% of its original performance, but enabling DLSS restores frame rates to roughly what we saw without RT enabled. Of course, image quality isn't quite as good as native, but the latest version of DLSS in this title does work very well, so for the full effect, ray tracing plus DLSS is probably going to be the way to go, but whatever your preference, there are more options available with the RTX 3080. Ray tracing in Far Cry 6 is more subtle, let's say, though some areas of the game do look very impressive with it enabled. As an AMD-sponsored title, this is one of the better optimizations for RDNA 2 GPUs, so the 6800 XT is respectable here. Watch Dogs Legion, on the other hand, is an NVIDIA-sponsored title, so really no surprises here. It was also released well before AMD's RDNA 2 architecture, so very little optimization for Radeon GPUs has been done here. As a result, the 6800 XT takes a 53% performance hit with the high quality RTFX enabled, while the 12GB 3080 takes a 39% hit, but again with DLSS enabled it can restore most of that performance, seen with the ultra quality settings which boosted performance by 33% with DLSS enabled. Alternatively, you can just enable DLSS without ray tracing, and here that resulted in a modest 9% gain. Resident Evil Village is an AMD sponsored game, so like Far Cry 6, we find that ray tracing isn't used quite as heavily, and it's used in a way that works better with AMD's implementation. Still, we're looking at a 49% hit for the 6800 XT, with a 35% hit for the 12GB 3080, though in both cases performance at 1440p is still excellent. Now here's a look at how the MSI RTX 3080 12GB Suprim X performs out of the box. After 30 minutes of gameplay, the GPU temperature peaked at 77 degrees, which is quite high, though we're looking at a relatively low fan speed of 1500 RPM, which meant the card was basically whisper quiet. So quite impressive given the GPU power was up around 390 watts. Also, the typical core clock speed was 1905 MHz, and of course the memory operated at 19 gigabits per second. Then overclocked, our sample peaked at 78 degrees with a very slight increase in fan speed, and here it averaged 1950 MHz, so a mere 2% boost from stock, and going any higher would cause the card to crash. The memory also peaked at 20 gigabits per second, so an insignificant 5% bump there, so stock the Suprim X wasn't far from being maxed out. So that's how the GeForce RTX 3080 12GB performs, and as expected, no real surprises. For NVIDIA though, this 12GB version, how do I put this, it's particularly useful to them. It's a much more profitable product. It does boost their margins quite significantly when compared to the original 10GB model, and that particular model allowed NVIDIA's partners and the distributors to cash in on the current market situation. Of course, we'd rather they just look after loyal customers who ordered an RTX 3080 at a reasonable price 16 months ago, but clearly they have no interest in doing that. So there's really no two ways about it. The 12GB RTX 3080 is a shameless cash grab that allows NVIDIA to further capitalize on the current market. So we know exactly why NVIDIA has released the 12GB 3080 and why they're not crazy about reviewers getting their hands on them, but what does it mean for consumers? Frankly, not a lot. For those of you holding out for cheaper prices, we'll have to continue to remain patient. And NVIDIA's move to further segment the GA102 lineup does nothing to improve supply. There's really no good news here, unfortunately, unless you plan on paying way too much for a graphics card. The 12GB 3080 is already on sale locally here in Australia, and when compared to the 3080 Ti, I guess you could say it's, not sure how to put this, but better value. Right now, PC Case Gear has the Suprim X version of the 10GB 3080, 12GB 3080, and 3080 Ti all in stock. The original 10GB 3080 can be had for $2,400, while the new 12GB version is $2,600, and then the 3080 Ti is $2,900. So that's an 8% premium over the 10GB model and a 10% saving when compared to the 3080 Ti. So based on that, the 10GB model still offers the best value overall, but the 12GB model is better than the 3080 Ti, so yippee. Of course, you shouldn't buy any of them, as this 16-month-old technology should cost $1,140 at the recommended retail price here in Australia for the 10GB 3080, and with the cheapest model at PC Case Gear listed for $2,200, that means right now we're at a 93% premium over the NVIDIA recommended retail price. And then over in the US, we see that Newegg.com has a few 12GB 3080s listed in their Newegg Shuffle, but of course they're out of stock despite starting at just over $1,200 US, and that's a 71% premium over the original RTX 3080's MSRP. So again, you should avoid and really refuse to buy a graphics card at those prices. Other than that though, I haven't got much more to say about the 12GB RTX 3080, and yeah, again, I think I've said 3080 too much, but it probably won't be the last time I say it before this video ends, so apologies in advance. But later this month, Tim will have one of his detailed GPU pricing updates, so we will have more information about pricing there, but there won't be too many surprises, I don't imagine. And of course, it's not going to change our opinion anyway. You simply shouldn't buy it right now. And on a final note, the MSI RTX 3080, 12GB Suprim X, it is a beast of a graphics card, quite impressive. But also, let down by the fact that the price is probably absurd. So it's really hard to get excited about it or say that it's particularly great, but that's really no fault of MSI's. But I suppose if you're going to get price gouged and you're willing to accept it, then, this is a good model to get rolled on, if that makes sense. But anyway, good product, works well, just unfortunately can't recommend it in the current market. So that's going to do it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a like. You can subscribe for more content because we do have a lot more new GPU reviews coming up this month. So that some of them should be quite interesting. But anyway, I won't say too much. But yeah, plenty of content coming up, some other unrelated stuff that's also going to be really interesting and fun. So yeah, make sure you subscribe for that. Also, you can become a Hardware Unboxed community member. We have Float, Plane, and Patreon. You'll get access to monthly live streams. Tim and I do those. They're a lot of fun. You can ask us questions there live. And yeah, it's a good time. We have an awesome Discord server. So great if you want to talk about PC related or really anything. It's a great place to hang out. Behind the scenes content, I just released a new behind the scenes video and Q&As. Anyway, cool stuff there at our Float, Plane, and Patreon accounts. You can sign up to either of one of those and it gives you access to everything. So check it out if you're interested. But if not, perfectly fine. And I would like to just thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time.